Hello, I'm Stephen, Technical Director for the Morton Theater. Welcome to this installment of the Green Room project or series here at the Morton Theater. Today we have Christin Schifano, my apologies. Can't English very well today. But we're going to talk with her about her experiences working in the entertainment industry. So welcome.
Thank you.
We were just discussing a little bit. Your connection here to the Morton goes back a number of years. Tell us a little bit about some of the roles that you've served in at the Morton, because you've worn several hats, and then transition and tell me a little bit about some of the things you've done in the entertainment industry as far as your role.
Sure. Well, my first experience ever at the Morton, I was working wardrobe for a University of Georgia production.
Okay.
As a student, I had no idea how big of a hold this place would later come to have on me. But I next returned to the Morton in 2013, I believe, to become the theater assistant. And I worked here for about a year and a half before taking time off to be with my child. Soon after that, I missed the theater. Once you're here, it grabs a hold of you.
Sure does.
So I started volunteering for the Morton Theater Corporation, the nonprofit board that supports the theater, as you know. Shortly after joining, I was asked to become vice president of the board. And then about a year, maybe 2 years, time kind of blends. Later, I was nominated president and served in that role for a few years. As far as my background in the entertainment industry, I became a costume designer first through a love of fashion. My undergraduate degree is in fashion.
Okay.
I spent a summer in Los Angeles and learned a little bit about the movie industry and costuming, and it kind of piqued my interest. I'd always had a love of theater, but had never thought pursuing it as an employment opportunity until I was in that world.
Right.
So I was fortunate to be offered an assistantship back at the University of Georgia, where I could complete a theatrical design Master of Fine Arts with a tuition waiver. So
Wow.
the tuition waiver got me.
Absolutely. That's a nice hook.
Yes. So it was a 3-year program, which was a little bit more of a time investment than I had intended to pursue, but for free education, it made sense. So I moved back and just kind of threw myself into the theater world. I studied costume, scenic, and lighting design, but costume was my focus. Secondary was scenic. And I met and worked with some really, really great instructors and also students. After I graduated, I spent another summer in LA and reconnected with a former graduate of the program. She was a third year graduating when I entered as a first year, but she and I just had a really good connection and worked well. So I did some unpaid work for her while there. Didn't think too much of it, just getting my feet wet, gaining experience. But about a year or so later, I got my big payoff. She called me, said, "What are you doing this weekend?" I'm like, "Laundry, I don't know." Next thing I knew, I was on a flight for my first professional wardrobe gig for the Barry Manilow tour, and that was in 2012. So that one weekend turned into a year and a half of being part of that wardrobe team. So we went all over the country and a few international venues as well. She worked with Barry. I worked with the band. It was 7 members and 2 singers, and it was an incredible group of people. It was a great experience. In between doing that, that was my main source of income. I took on design gigs for the university's opera department. Doing a lot of classics like La Boheme, which I'll always have love for. And I got to work with some visiting directors from New York quite a bit, which was a really good experience.
Yeah.
I worked on a few commercials and a feature film during that time. So it was fun. It was a lot of hard work, but also a lot of fun.
Wow, you packed quite a bit of experience in a short period of time.
Yes, it was great.
And it's quite interesting. You literally just got that call
Right.
that took you from, okay, this is a pursuit of mine, and then now this is something that I'm actually building a career in. And I
Right.
think we all kind of need that quote lucky break, or somebody who sort of gets us going in our career. And you sort of already hit on, like, I didn't know all these things. I knew a couple of those items, but I didn't know all your educational experience, and then bouncing back and forth between East Coast and West Coast. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, and
That's
I
very cool.
was lucky. I had friends that lived in LA, so I had a free place to stay, and that's not something everybody has.
That's
So that
true.
definitely helped. And again, it was taking that unpaid work that
Oh,
led to the big break. And unpaid work, it's a risk. You don't know if you'll ever get a payback from it. So I wouldn't
right,
do that just for anyone, but this was someone that I knew and trusted, and I knew was supporting herself independently on costuming work in LA. So she's someone I trusted. It wasn't just some random online
right,
because there's so many of that, like, no pay, but you'll get you'll get the experience. And it's like you can only do that so many times. Like, you have to value your time and your
right.
craft too.
Yeah, that comes a point where the building of the portfolio has to stop, and you have to just jump in with both feet. It's
Right.
interesting you brought up that your friend, you had someone that you trusted,
Exactly.
and you qualified that free work based off the knowledge and relationship that you had with this person. Building that sort of people intuition, I think, is a really important part of being successful in this business. Being able to read people, their intentions,
Right.
taking calculated risk,
Right.
things like that. I have to admit, there's not a whole lot that I know about what goes into the day to day of a wardrobe or costume designer. I imagine, there's all sorts of decisions that have to be made, deadlines. You're dealing with physical material, things that have to move from A to B. I'm sure there's things that happen to costumes, last minute changes, um, things like that. So, can you walk me through just,
Sure.
what a typical day in the life would have been like for you during that period?
What no one warns you about is the amount of number crunching you will do as a designer in any one of our wardrobe department. You know automatically, oh, it's design, there's color and fabric swatches and sewing, but you're also given a budget, and that budget has to meet a lot of needs. Especially if you're touring or if you're doing film, you need duplicates of costumes. So you really have to plan carefully how you're allocating those funds to meet the needs of the story being told. What can be reused, what can be modified, what can be changed from stock, that sort of thing. You also have to take in consideration the wear and tear that costume is going to have. There are some suits that are $5,000 and look beautiful for a function, but will look terrible on the road from the repeated use. So just because it has a nice price tag and a nice name attached to it doesn't automatically mean that's a great choice. So you really have to pay attention to the fabric content and just how it's sewn together. Delicate isn't always the best, when on the road. Also care of laundry and maintenance, those sort of things. So it's a lot of planning just beyond how something looks. Like, how something looks is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
There's also, like, whenever you see shiny sequin gowns on stage, there's normally something that's been done to create the underarm more comfortable so there's not that rubbing and raw skin, that sort of thing. Trying to think what else. There's, of course, distressing if you're doing something more theatrical. I like, whenever I'm watching TV, I always get a kick out of seeing sweat stains in someone's shirt because I'm like, that's someone's job to put that sweat stain there.
Really?
Yes.
That's crazy.
So I love doing distressing work. But yeah, so you'll have duplicates of that one shirt, some with sweat stains that have been put in manually and some without. And you have to carefully tag everything. You also have a book that's kept where you can keep track, because obviously scenes aren't shot in sequence. So
Right.
you really have to be careful about continuity and making sure you're putting the performer in the correct pair of jeans, the correct shirt, it's buttoned and the cuffs are rolled exactly the same, that sort of thing. That's a
Wow.
big part of
Right.
what a wardrobe department does, in film especially. So yeah, but I'd say the biggest amount of work is just in the planning of it, the figuring out how you're spending your money and on what, and just making sure you have enough
Right.
for the demands of that garment.
You brought up so many things there, and thank you for sharing that. One, you mentioned like the story, like making sure that the choices that are being made are telling the correct story. Unpack that for me, if you could.
Sure,
Just like
yeah.
who gets to make those decisions? How much of that decision is yours? How much is the director? And then talk to me a little bit. Obviously, lots of organizational skills needed in that career. Talk to me a little bit about, and I'm sure it will depend on the size of the project, how many people you have in the wardrobe department, and then who does more of the number crunching, more of the physical sewing. And then I can imagine, especially being out on the road, making those decisions to make sure when you're choosing fabrics and things like that, that you can actually get your hands on those things if need be. If you're in Denver one night and Boise another night and LA another night, you have suppliers that can get those things to you, so that you can respond to any emergencies that you might have.
So, so we'll go to the look of things and making sure it fits the character first. That really depends on the director and the producer. I've worked with some who are involved in every aspect. Like they know exactly what look they want, and they just want you to deliver it. And then I've worked with others who, especially if you've worked with them a few times before and they already know and like your approach, where they just give you the dollar amount and step back.
So
You
more
always
hands off.
go to them, once you have your design solid and on paper first, whether it's a Photoshop or if you've old school like me and like to draw and paint it. You always go to them and present, this is the plan. And
Right.
then from there you go back and forth on what you like, what needs to be changed. As far as revealing character, every visual aspect, the texture of the fabric, how it's put together, the color, obviously, like it all gives you details about characters. I could spend hours and have spent hours talking about that. So I won't go into too much detail here. But it really depends on the director or producer, how involved they want to be in the design process. And it just, if it's a first time that you are working with that particular person, they're probably going to be more involved. Whereas if you have an established work history, they let go of the reins a little more.
Right.
So, and as far as teams, how big the wardrobe crew is, again, that depends on the scale of the production. Small theater, it's usually one designer, and if you're lucky, a couple of drapers and stitchers. The designer does all of the sourcing of fabric and of talent, the stitchers and drapers. All of that happens months before you get into fittings and productions.
Right.
It's a long process. Same when you're on the road. During breaks on the road, like when you're touring, when you're back at your home base, like my boss, this was her job. When she was back in LA, that's what she was doing. She was shopping, whether it was for fabric or for suits or dresses. That's how she spent her off time from the road. Now, when we're on the road, we travel with a bunch of road cases. So we've got all of our fabrics, all of our stitching materials or machines or steamers, all of that goes with us, as well as extra wardrobe costumes.
Right.
So, but we will have what's called runners at any venue that we go to where, oh my goodness, I'm out of a Tide stick, little things like that.
Right.
We can send them out to get those things for us. We'd normally get 2 local crew members at each venue to do things like steaming and assist in the load in and load out of dressing rooms, that sort of things. As far as movies, it depends on the budget.
Right.
I've worked on a small film where it was me and one other girl, and that was a bit challenging.
Imagine.
But when you're on well budgeted films, it's a team of people.
Imagine so. Wow, you've kind of breaking this whole world up for me. This is a whole side of the entertainment business I've really not given a whole lot of thought to. You've talked to me a little bit about positions and roles and how you interact with other people throughout the business and how decisions are made. Talk to me, I guess, a little bit about misconceptions or myths or things that you were maybe surprised that were different from what you thought the industry would be like, maybe from your college experience to being out on the road, and then kind of how you dealt with that.
Right. I'd say the biggest thing is really knowing how to work with people. You work with a variety of very big personalities in entertainment. And you work with a lot of very excited people in entertainment, especially if you're working on a show that happens to be that performer's first big break.
Right.
You also work with people that have been doing this for a very long time and can be very territorial.
Experienced that before.
You have to learn how to navigate those different personalities, efficiently. Not being a doormat, but also being able to get the job done.
Right.
I'd say was probably the biggest learning curve leaving school, going into the working world, because you don't think about that. You think about, this is my craft, this is what I love, but you're not thinking about all the moving parts and pieces, and because it's a lot of people that put on a show, as you know. So I think there could have been a little more conversation about that during education years, about more working as a team rather than being focused on this idea that you have. Again, the numbers, when you're in an art program, you're not focused on accounting. That would be helpful.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Especially with
accounting.
some of these large budgets and the small ones, to know how to stretch it out in a smart way.
Right.
So those are all things that will make you more successful in that field for sure. The other thing is the misconception. Everyone just thinks costumes, they're shiny and they're pretty. And it's like, no, not necessarily. It's a lot more than that. It doesn't make sense for every character to stick out in a certain way. Some characters are supposed to blend in the background. And especially when you're working with very eager new performers, they want to get out there and they want to look good. So they don't always understand why, I'm not emphasizing their physique in certain ways. And it's like, that's not your role here. Like, that's not. And there's a lot of character development and character analysis you have to do as a costume designer in order to appropriately dress those characters, which kind of leads into, not every costume is meant to be beautiful.
Right.
So that's something you struggle with, especially with more inexperienced performers and costume techs, So, I mean, everybody wants things to be lovely, but it just doesn't always make sense. So
it's always going back to that story. It's interesting to me too, just to hear there's a whole thought process that's going in, and it seems like to me there might be some opportunities or challenges where you have somebody in their dressing room that might not be, let's say, as compliant as you would like them to be, or
absolutely,
they're not getting along with the program. does any particular story, and you don't have to use names or anything like that, but we all have road stories that we tell. Is there
Yeah.
any particular time where it was challenging, but now when you look back, it's rather funny?
Well, I mean, it's no one stands out particularly more than the other, but just the conversation we were just talking about, like, but I want to be pretty, or why don't I get to wear that nice suit? Well, it's the 19th century and you're a starving bohemian in France. You don't get to wear a beautiful, nicely tailored, fresh suit, or, you're a townsperson. You don't get the silk taffeta, like, just little things like that. And, background talent wanting to who are very beautiful but can't upstage the romantic lead.
Right.
So got to cover up a little bit. So yeah, just and I get it. They want to stand out because they want their career to keep going. I totally get that. But at the end of the day, it's my job to make sure the costumes fit the story,
Right.
and that particular character. I think my most memorable, and it's not really a misconception, but just kind of a surprise, was showing up at a amphitheater in LA while on tour. And normally we loaded in around 10 or 11 in the morning, and the show would happen around 7 or 8. Around 4 o'clock, I found out there was a whole, there was 2 big road cases full of choir robes that needed to be steamed, and surprise, there's a choir in this and it's going to be on TV. So
Wow.
that was really fun. It was a big choir. So I had to very, very quickly get all these robes steamed and everybody fitted so that the hems would be even while being televised. That was a lot of fun. But
Wow.
we did it.
Thinking about someone who wants to get into this profession as a wardrobe person, a costume designer, A, what's some advice you might give to that person? B, along with that, what's some steps you think that they can begin to take now if they're either in a program right now, what's some things they can begin to do to get the most out of this program to be a little bit more prepared when they, quote, get out into the real world?
I would say definitely develop your talent, but also diversify yourself. Like, whether I think something that pairs well, particularly with costuming, would be graphic design. There's just a lot of opportunities there, and in the gaming industry especially. If you can get into the gaming industry and do costuming, you'd probably make a nice living for yourself.
Never thought about that.
Yeah, there's a whole world of that, of the people behind the gaming developers needing help imagining these costumes. I would also say don't ignore the basics of finances, not just for costuming, budgeting reasons, but so that you are able to live off of gig income. Like, again, it's a lot of planning. You may be getting $600 a day, but when that job's over, then what? Like, you can't
Right.
spend it all at once. So, like, learn how to manage your personal finances, because, gig work, it comes and it goes.
Right. It's feast and famine.
Yeah. So, that would be my advice. My other advice would be to network carefully. Don't be afraid to take unpaid work, but make sure it makes sense.
Right. Strategic decisions.
Exactly. Definitely place value on your work, and do it with the expectation that it will pay off, for certain people, but not for every opportunity or every person that offers you that experience job with no pay.
Right.
And really, I mean, it's a networking game. I feel like many industries probably are,
Right.
but But the theater world and the entertainment world, it's a tight knit group of people that once you've been vetted and they know that you're easy to work with and you're also good at what you do, you'll get those callbacks. But
Right.
you have to find a way to get into that circle.
Right. I
So
found
that
that to
would
be
be my
very true
advice.
in the circles that I've run into, is that vetting process, and can sometimes you feel like at certain points you hit glass ceilings, and then all of a sudden, a connection comes up. And so, a lot of times it is from one of these favors you did for somebody, like
Yeah.
they called you up, they were in a jam and you loaned them a piece of equipment, or you gave them a piece of advice and didn't ask for a consulting fee. you know um, just knowing how to, quote, play those situations strategically, not always thinking, well, what am I going to get out of this? But, like you said, being easy to work with and being good at your craft. Like, I find that symbiotic relationship to be very important.
Yes.
You can be an absolute phenom of a talent in a given field, but if you can't work with other people, you're just
Exactly.
not going to get the gigs.
Maybe more trouble than what you're worth.
Right.
Yeah, you have to play nice.
There
Don't be
you
a
go.
doormat, but play nice.
I appreciate you coming out today and talking to us. I've learned so much about being a costume designer. I don't think that I have the talent to do that. I have worked with a lot of costume and wardrobe folks, being a lighting designer. And so I've learned it from the other side of the coin. And when those two elements work well together, and scenic design as well, there's a euphoria, I think, that just comes, and a satisfaction you get from a job well done, and that collaborative effort. It's payment in and of itself, and I love that. The elephant in the room is the COVID-19 pandemic. We know it's had enormous impact all over the world, especially to the entertainment industry as a whole. What steps do you think that someone should take, or have you seen other folks who are still in the industry take, to just keep doing their job safely, stay employed, you know, become ingenuitive in the way they've solved issues? What's kind of the word on the street in the wardrobe side of the entertainment business? What have you seen?
Well, the bigger productions have closed down for now. One day they'll be back, but I think it's just right now quality over quantity. Just smaller productions, smaller teams, but just giving it your all. I mean, I don't think there's really anything more we can do at this point. Commercials are fine. Again, small teams of people, few people. But the touring and stuff, it's going to be a minute
Yeah.
before it's fully back. So same with film production. It's just it may take longer to do, to do it safely with less people on set, but I don't know how costly that would be, or if that would even make sense from a budgeting standpoint to do it that way. So that's above my pay grade. I don't know
I'm with you.
what they're gonna do there. But yeah, it's definitely it's had a big impact. I think most of the work happening right now that I hear about in my area is commercial work.
Right.
So,
I think that gives people a chance to, not atrophy in their skill set. Keep your brain engaged. Keep your hands engaged in, your craft, and also continue to. Sometimes I found being present is the best thing that I can do to advertise myself as available for the next gig. So if I'm on a set, like you said, just giving my all, even if it's, not just when the boss is in the room, or whether, it's high stakes, taking every job that you do seriously, give it your best. You never know who's watching.
exactly.
And you never know who's going to see that or who's connected to that project. And they go, oh, who did that wardrobe design? That's fantastic. And that sticks in people's minds. Like you said, once you're vetted, you're in as far as the quality of your work. And then the other part is just continuing to be that person that others can work with and collaborate with. So it's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. You
I feel
too.
like I've known you for almost 4 years, and we've worked closely with me being on staff and you being involved with the Morton Theater Corporation. And I knew bits and pieces of your story, but I feel like I walk away from this interview knowing a whole lot more about you, have a whole lot more respect for folks who work on that side of the business. It's a skill set that I don't have, but I can definitely appreciate and have learned a whole lot about just by taking a few minutes to talk with you.
Great. Thank you.
In our closing, that was our false closing. So if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice to the younger self that might have made your journey a little bit smoother, do you have anything on your mind that you would tell to your younger self?
Well, I was always so hesitant to pursue opportunities because I was also always fearful of, well, what if I fail? Then what am I going to do? But you do kind of just have to throw yourself in it. If you're going to do it, you got to do it.
Right.
So I do wish, looking back, I had said yes to a few more things rather than being like, nah, I'm not sure that's gonna be worth it.
Right. So taking a few more risks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Put yourself out there.
Especially when you're younger, what
Yeah.
what do you have to lose? Try it.
Right. I think that fear of rejection holds a lot of us back. I know that, like, looking back in my development as an audio engineer, there's still some of that hesitancy that I had in my early development, whereas I picked up other skill sets, lighting and rigging and other things later that I don't have the degrees in, but I feel so much more confident and comfortable doing. And I think it has all to do with the way I learned it and where I was as a person. So yeah, I can definitely echo that piece of advice is just put yourself out there a little bit more.
And I do want to clarify, I learned it through education, but that was because of an opportunity of it being free. This is not a profession where you have to be in school for a long time.
Right.
Like, take your time, learn to sew, first of all.
Right.
And there's so many books out there, and pick the brains of working professionals, read about character analysis. Like, there's definitely avenues outside of school that can get you into this world.
I'm glad you hit on that, pardon the pun, but that's been a common thread in a lot of our conversations in this series is I think this is what makes this business so exciting to me is yes, there is room for the formal education and it's never wasted.
Right.
But it's not always necessary. It's
Right.
not the only path. And there's been many people who have been successful. But you do have to put in the work one way or another. You have to put
Absolutely.
in the work, whether you do it in a formal way or informal way. But once you got it, people recognize it. And that's really, really awesome. Love that piece of advice. Well, Christin, it's been an absolute joy speaking to you again. And we hopefully if this series continues to go forward, we can have you back and you can share some more experiences with us. But thanks for making the drive today, coming out to the Morton. Again, this has been the Morton Green Room series, and we're so thankful for you tuning in.
Thank you so much.